mother, as enunciated in the Smriti scriptures of Vedic literature, are very useful. We can understand from Vedic literature how much care is taken to beget a child in society. The Garbhodana ceremony before sexual intercourse was compulsory for persons in the higher grades of society, and it is very scientific. Other processes recommended in the Vedic literature during pregnancy are also very important. To take care of the child is the primary duty of the parents, because if such care is taken, society will be filled with good population to maintain the peace and prosperity of the society, country, and human race. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Ram.
We did cover this yesterday.
Okay. Text number 6. Bitten again and again all over the body by the hungry worms in the abdomen itself. The child suffers terrible agony because of his tenderness, and he thus becomes unconscious moment after moment because of the terrible condition. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The miserable condition of material existence is not only felt when we come out of the womb of the mother, but is also present within the womb. Miserable life begins from the moment the living entity begins to contact his material body. Unfortunately, we forget this experience and do not take the miseries of birth very seriously. In Bhagavad Gita, therefore, it is specifically mentioned that one should be very alert to understand the specific difficulties of birth and death. Just as during the formation of this body, we have to pass through so many difficulties within the womb of the mother. At the time of death, there are also many difficulties. As described in the previous chapter, one has to transmigrate from one body to another, and the transmigration into the bodies of dogs and hogs is especially miserable. But despite such miserable conditions, due to the spell of Maya, we forget everything and become enamored by the present so-called happiness, which is described as actually no more than a counteraction to distress. Now, see, that's a very profound statement. What we consider as happiness is not really happiness. It's just like a man who buys shoes that are too tight for his foot or feet. Why? Well, he wants to get a particular type of shoe, but he finds out that the store where he's trying to buy the shoe does not have the right size for his foot. But because he likes that type of shoe, he buys it anyway, and he wears it. And because it's too small for his foot, he walks around all day long, and when he takes off the shoe, he feels, oh, that feels so good. Because the shoe is too small for his foot. It's been pinching his foot or his feet all day long. So the pleasure he experiences by taking the shoe off and relieving all the pressure on his foot or his feet is not real pleasure. It's simply the what you would call relief from the suffering, and that's called pleasure. But it's not real pleasure. So there's a difference between relief from suffering and real pleasure. So the relief from suffering, yeah, there is might be a little sensation of pleasure, but that's not real pleasure. Real pleasure is there's no suffering related to it. It's pure happiness. So it says here that the miserable condition of material existence is not only felt when we come out of the womb of the mother, but it's also felt within the womb. Miserable life begins from the moment the living entity begins to contact his material body. Unfortunately, we forget this experience and do not take the miseries of birth very seriously. In Bhagavad Gita, therefore, it is specifically mentioned that one should be very alert to understand the specific difficulties of birth and death. Just as during the formation of this body, we have to pass through so many difficulties within the womb of the mother, at the time of death, there are also many difficulties, as described in the previous chapter. One has to transmigrate from one body to another. And the transmigration into the bodies of dogs and hogs is especially miserable. But despite such miserable conditions, due to the spell of Maya, we forget everything and become enamored by the present so-called happiness, which is described as actually no more than the counteraction to distress. Yeah, the relief one feels after suffering some condition in body, that's not real happiness. Real happiness is when you're completely healthy and do not have any, let's say, diseases or certain types of, let's say, uncomfortable conditions. But the relief from those uncomfortable conditions is not real happiness. Real happiness is sustained peace and good, let's say, health, and being free from all the different types of pains and sufferings that the body can go through. Okay, so the fact that we forget things due to Maya gives us the thought that we can be happy, which is described as actually no more than a counteraction to distress. That's a very profound statement. And I always give the example of the man who is trying to buy a certain style of shoes, but unfortunately, his shoe type, his shoe
Size.
type, they don't have the shoe that fits his foot, but they have the same the style of shoe that he likes, but it's smaller than his foot. But he buys it anyway because he likes the style of the shoe. And then when he walks around all day long with the shoe that's too small for his feet, it causes a lot of, let's say, discomfort. And when he takes the shoe off after walking around all day long, he says, "Oh, that feels so good." Now, is that really happiness? No, it's not happiness. It's just the relief from suffering, but that's not real happiness. So that's why it says here, but despite such miserable conditions, due to the spell of Maya, we forget everything and become enamored by the present so called happiness, which is described as actually no more than a counteraction to distress. that's a that's a correct statement,
Yeah.
and profound statement, actually. That's not really happiness. Yeah. Okay. Well, someone will say it's happiness, but counteracting the distress is not really a happiness. Happiness is something that is not, let's say, uh, the relief of suffering. Happiness is not having any suffering and living a very healthy and very, let's say, a life that is free from pain and anxiety and all those bad things. Okay, text number 7. Owing to the mother's eating bitter, pungent foodstuffs, or food which is too salty or too sour, the body of the child incessantly suffers pains which are almost intolerable. Report by Srila Prabhupada. All descriptions of the child's bodily situation in the womb of the mother are beyond our conception. It is very difficult to remain in such a position, but still the child has to remain because his consciousness is not very developed. The child can tolerate it, otherwise he would die. That is the benediction of Maya, who endows the suffering body with the qualifications for tolerating such terrible tortures. Yeah. The child in the womb of the mother is suffering terribly, especially after the 7th month of the development of the fetus. But because the consciousness of the child is not fully developed, the child is able to suffer terribly without dying, and because their consciousness is very limited. If a man or if a grown person would be put in such a situation as the child in the womb, they would be more or less screaming out of pain. But the child, packed up very tightly in the womb of the mother, is somehow able to survive. And even though there's so much pain and difficulties, like for example, if a pregnant mother starts eating pungent foods, when those food touch the skin of the child suffers terribly. So it's very important that mothers do not eat bitter, pungent foodstuffs or food which are too salty or too sour, because the body of the child incessantly suffers pains which are almost intolerable for the child. And a purport to this text 7, Canto 3, chapter 31, 6, 7 says, all descriptions of the child's bodily condition in the womb of the mother are beyond our conception. Yeah. We don't remember all that suffering that we went through when we were in the womb of the mother. It is very difficult to remain in such a position. Yeah, so because you're tightly bound up in the womb of the mother, and the only way you can tolerate it is by having very low consciousness, just like when a person is sedated with some, type of medicine. Well, their consciousness of pain is a sort of the pain is still there, but they don't feel it so much because they're put into sleep, or they're put into some kind of state where they don't feel the pain. It's just like when you go to the dentist and he's going to start to drill your uh, teeth. He gives you a shot of Novocaine in different parts of your mouth, right? So that numbs you, and that just those specific parts of the body or in specific parts of the mouth. So when he's drilling like that, you can hear it, you can feel the heat, but you don't really feel the pain so much. But after the effect of the Novocaine goes away, then the pain comes. So actually, it was artificial numbness. So in the same way, it's saying here that because his consciousness is not very developed, the child can tolerate it. Otherwise, he would die. That is the benediction of Maya, who endows the suffering body with the qualifications for tolerating such terrible tortures. Wow. So, the whole process of birth is stressful for the mother and for the child. But because the child's consciousness is not fully developed yet, the child is able to, let's say, tolerate the very difficult situation the child is in, all packed up very tightly in the womb of the mother. And then when there is birth, it's very painful for the mother and the child, because the child is forced, if there's no cesarean birth, where the stomach of the mother is sort of cut and they take the child out. The child has to go through the very tight orifice of the mother's vagina to get out of the body, and oftentimes you'll see the child's head, because it's still very soft, is so much pressure on it that it becomes like more elongated than round, right? Because the child had to go through the vagina of the mother, and it's terrible. But because the consciousness of the child is not very developed, it can not, let's say, die due to the pain. And sometimes you'll see when the child is born, there are yellow rings of where all the pressure on the head took place, and the head is like elongated. It's not really round. And then later on, after the birth, it eventually becomes, rounded again. That's because of the pain, and not only the pain, but the pressure on pushing the child out of the womb of the mother. The orifice of the mother is rather small, and the head of the child is in the womb is big. So to get that big head through the orifice of the mother is not easy for the child, and both the mother and the child suffer during that period of childbirth. So that's why it says, all descriptions of the child's bodily situation in the womb of the mother and beyond are beyond our conception. It is very difficult to remain in such a position. But Still, the child has to remain because his consciousness is not very developed. The child can tolerate it, otherwise, he would die. That is the benediction of Maya, who endows the suffering body with the qualifications for tolerating such terrible tortures. Yeah, it's just like you go to the dentist, and before he begins to work on your teeth, he gives you a couple shots of Novocaine so you don't feel so much pain when he starts working on your teeth. Same way, uh, the child in when uh, the child in the womb, the consciousness of the child in the womb, when the child is ready to get out of the mother's womb, is very low, and therefore it can tolerate all the pain of going through the orifice of the mother, which is squeezing it very tightly. And sometimes you'll see the soft head of the newly born child is somewhat elongated, and there might even be like uh, some visible, uh, let's say, tightness that took place in the child's head, and then after a couple of days, the head becomes rounded again. So you can see how there's so much misery right from childbirth. And that's why Prabhupada says, all descriptions of the child's bodily situation in the womb of the mother are beyond our conception. It is very difficult to remain in such a position. But still, what does that mean? So that the head of the child is very tightly packed up in the womb, and that condition, if that was if an adult was put into the position of the child, they would die. It's too much pain. Because his consciousness is not very developed, the child can tolerate it. Otherwise, he would die. That is the benediction of Maya, who endows the suffering body with the qualifications for tolerating such terrible tortures. Wow, you see, that's the right word. The child is actually tortured in the body of the mother, and especially at the time of where the child is trying to get out of the womb. Text number 8. Placed within the amnion and covered outside by the intestines. The amnion is some type of slightly liquid, let's say, covering of the child in the womb. The child remains lying on one side of the abdomen. Okay, so if it's on, let's say, the right side, I think it's going to be a girl. If it's on the left side, it's going to be a boy or something like that. Placed within the amnion and covered outside by the intestines, the child remains lying on one side of the abdomen, his head turned towards his belly, and his back and neck arched like a bow. So, in other words, the child is in the womb is in a position that no grown person would be able to tolerate. The pain would be too excruciating. If a grown man were put into such a condition as the child within the abdomen, completely entangled in all respects, it would be impossible for him to live even for a few seconds. Unfortunately, we forget all these sufferings and try to be happy in this life, not caring for the liberation of the soul from the entanglement of birth and death. It is unfortunate civilization. It is an unfortunate civilization in which these matters are not plainly discussed to make people understand the precarious conditions of material existence. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Well, Prabhupada's explaining to us what is the reality. And in order to mitigate that reality, there's such a thing, there are different types of medicines like morphine and other, drugs that uh, uh, that help uh, uh, temporarily stop feeling pain. And by the way, after the effect of the drug goes away, you get the pain also. But during let's say, an operation, a severe operation, uh, you don't feel the pain. Otherwise, you'd be trying to move around and get away. And sometimes they have to tie down the patient that they have to operate on, or highly sedate the patient so it doesn't move around while they're operating. There are many difficult situations in life, and if you want to see them, you go to a hospital in the operating room, and you'll see what is the reality of pain. And everybody has pain. And the first thing the doctor will ask you is, do you have any pain? Right? And if you do, well, they'll give you some kind of a shot to temporarily, cover artificially the pain. Okay, text number 9. The child thus remains just like a bird in a cage, without freedom of movement. At that time, if the child is fortunate, he can remember all the troubles of his past 100 births, and he grieves wretchedly. What is the possibility of peace of mind in that condition? Well, that means that while we're still in the womb of the mother, we can remember 100 births previous to the present. And the child grieves wretchedly. But because of the excruciating pain of childbirth, the child forgets it. We all forget it, all the pains that we've suffered in previous births. And it says 100 past births. And he grieves wretchedly. What is the possibility of peace of mind in that condition? No. I mean, already the child in the womb, especially after the 7th month, is very conscious and is able to remember his previous births. But because of the trauma of childbirth, he forgets. And in the purport, it says, after birth, the child may forget about the difficulties of his past lives. But when we are grown up, we can at least understand the grievous tortures undergone at birth and death by reading the authorized scriptures, like Srimad Bhagavatam. If we do not believe in the scriptures, that is a different question. But if we have faith in the authority of such descriptions, then we must prepare for our freedom in the next life. That is possible in this human form of life. One who does not take heed of these indications of suffering in human existence is said to be undoubtedly committing suicide. It is said that this human form of life is the only means for crossing over the nescience or ignorance of Maya or material existence. We have a very efficient boat in this human form of body, and there is a very expert captain, the spiritual master. The spiritual injunctions are like favorable winds, and if we do not cross over the ocean of the nescience or ignorance of material existence, in spite of all these facilities, then certainly we are all intentionally committing suicide.
Wow.
So, if we are fortunate enough to read the Srimad Bhagavatam, then we can actually understand what has happened to us in the past, what is happening to us now, and what is going to happen to us in the future. Then we might become, let's say, very, very serious about freeing ourselves from the vicious cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease. And going back to the spiritual world in a spiritual body, where all these horrible things are not there. You can imagine, you're packed up in the womb of your mother, and especially after the 7th month, you're conscious of all the pains that and problems that you're having in the womb. And the mother can feel the child kicking to try and get out. And just imagine it's like you're packed up in the womb of your mother, and now by the 7th month, your consciousness developed enough that you actually can feel the pain of that situation, and it's excruciating. So much so that it can make you faint. And that's the position that we all went through. And then the actual birth is another very, very stressful situation because you're pushed through a very small, let's say, orifice of the mother to get out. And she suffers, and the baby suffers tremendously. Well, it's unimaginable. But we've all gone through that. I used to have a long time ago. I used to have a recurring dream of being stuck in a. In other words, I was trying to go through a very small hole in the earth, and I got stuck in that hole, and I couldn't move forward or backwards and get out. I would have that dream. I haven't had it for a long time, but I had that dream many times when I was a lot younger. And I couldn't understand why I was dreaming like that I was in such a situation. Obviously, I was in a situation like that with my mother. Okay, text number 10. Thus endowed with the development of consciousness from the 7th month after his conception, the child is tossed downward by the airs that press the embryo during the weeks preceding delivery. Like the worms born of the same filthy abdominal cavity, we cannot remain in one place. Yeah, because the child's skin is being bitten by these worms in the womb of the mother. And the child cannot really get away from it because it's packed up in the womb of the mother. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. At the end of the 7th month, the child is moved by the bodily air and does not remain in the same place, for the entire uterine system becomes slackened before delivery. The worms have been described here as Sudara. Sudara means born of the same mother. Since the child is born from the womb of the mother, and the worms are also born of fermentation within the womb of the same mother, under the circumstances, the child and the worms are actually brothers. Oh my God, that's terrible. We are very anxious to establish universal brotherhood among human beings, but we should take into consideration that even the worms are our brothers. What to speak of other living entities? Therefore, we should be concerned about all living entities. Wow. Jai Shri Prabhupada. The living entity in this frightful condition of life, bound by 7 layers of material ingredients, prays with folded hands, appealing to the Lord who has put him in that condition. Yeah, so if you can make let's say, a photo of the position of the child in the womb, and they do that. You'll see that the child is like this, in the position of like praying, with their hands very close to their neck or touching the neck. And actually, that's the position of prayer. The child is praying to Krishna, please get me out of this terrible situation. The living entity in this frightful condition of life, bound by 7 layers of material ingredients, prays with folded hands, appealing to the Lord who has put him in that condition. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. It is said that when a woman is having labor pains, she promises that she will never again become pregnant and suffer from such a severely painful condition. Similarly, when one is undergoing some surgical operation, he promises that he will never again act in such a way as to become diseased and have to undergo medical surgery. Or when one fails and one falls into danger, he promises that he will never again make the same mistake. Similarly, the living entity, when put into a hellish condition of life, prays to the Lord that he will never again commit sinful activities and have to be put into the womb for repeated birth and death. In the hellish condition within the womb, the living entity is very much afraid of being born again. But when he is out of the womb, when he is in full life and good health, he forgets everything and commits again and again the same sins for which he was put into that horrible condition of existence. Forgetfulness. That's the enemy. We forget things and we try again and again to find some place where we can be happy in this material world. So you see, there are like very rich people that go on vacations a lot, the nice places. While it's freezing cold here in Seattle, they're in the beach somewhere in South America, enjoying life, trying to get away from the cold and the blizzards and things like that. But that doesn't mean that they're free from suffering. Even the richest people in the world, they suffer, just like the poor people in the world. It's impossible to stop suffering. Why? Because suffering is a message to us that we have made some mistakes. And it's trying to teach us that, look, you're making mistakes, you're drinking liquor, you're having illicit sex, or you're gambling, or You're doing all these things. These are all mistakes. And there are consequences for doing things like that. And basically, the body is being tortured by the bad habits of the human being. Therefore, the body talks to the human being by causing pain. And pain is usually when there's some pressure, like it's just like being next to a big balloon that is being filled more and more and putting more and more pressure on the body. And now you feel like you're suffocating. So this is what's happening. Usually, pain is caused by some uh, pressure because of, let's see, the right word. Yeah, inflation of the body. Like when you get puffed up.
Inflammation.
Inflammation, yeah, because you inflate like this, that causes pain in the body. There's so many things. It's unbelievable that we have to learn about this body. Okay, so text 11. We already read that.
Read that, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, there's some takeaways here. Let's take a look at it. Yeah, this is very interesting. Prabhupada writes in the purport. Similarly, when one is undergoing some surgical operation, he promises that he will never again act in such a way as to become diseased and have to undergo medical surgery, or when he falls into danger, he promises that he will never again make the same mistake. Similarly, the living entity, when put into a hellish condition of life, prays to the Lord that he will never again commit sinful activities and have to be put into the womb for repeated birth and death. In the hellish condition in the womb, the living entity is very much afraid of being born again, because when he is out of the womb, when he is in full life and good health, he forgets everything and commits again and again the same sins for which he was put into that horrible condition of existence. Wow. So, by reading the Shastra, we can remember what was our horrible condition and in the moment of birth and the time that we spent in the womb of the mother. And by reading the Shastra, we can understand what type of horrible situation we were in to get us to become very sober and serious about becoming Krishna conscious and getting free from the cycle of birth and death. Otherwise, people never learn, even though they're suffering terribly in this life. And they die in ignorance. And again, they have to go through the cycle of birth, old age, disease, and death. Text number 12. The human soul says, I take shelter of the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of God, who appears in his various eternal forms and walks on the surface of the earth, surface of the world. I take shelter of him only, because he can give me relief from all fear, and from him I have received this condition of life, which is just befitting my impious activities. Well, this is the sober realization of the human being. Not that every human being will be sober enough to understand things because they're drinking liquor or they're taking drugs to mitigate somewhat the pain they have. But a genuine, let's say, uh, person who is ready to understand what the real condition of life is, they're not always trying to artificially mask pain. Pain is a message to us. And if we try and hide that message by taking different types of drugs, that just prolongs uh, our life in the material world. Pain is a message. Our body is speaking to us when there's pain. And pain in the body is usually due to swelling in the body, swelling in the body, due to bad hygiene or not eating properly, or so many different reasons why there's swelling in the body, and the swelling causes the pain. So, just like if you have uh, 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 basically, if you have a balloon in your body and it's being increased, that causes pressure and you feel pain. So uh, sometimes parts of the body just start increasing because of bad diet, bad habits, or whatever, and that puts pressure on the different body parts, and that causes pain. And if it's too much pain, then the doctor will give you these uh, drugs like opium uh, to mitigate the pain temporarily. It doesn't mean the pain is not there, it's there, but it makes your consciousness lower so you don't feel the pain as much. But that drug will wear off and the pain is still there. Okay, so the living entity in this frightful condition of life, bound by 7 layers of material ingredients. What are those 7 layers of material ingredients? We should look that up by the elephant in the room.
The 7 layer.
What are the 7 layers that bound us up? They're material ingredients. What's interesting here is that the child in the womb is praying, and you can see it. It's like this. If you take a picture of the child in the womb, it's got his hands right up on his neck, and it looks like he's praying. Yeah, there he is, praying. You and me, we were both in that same situation. Yeah, all packed up there by different layers. My God.
So the 7 layers are basically except mind, the the remaining 7 elements. It's saying it's earth, water, fire, air, ether, intelligence, and ego.
Called the amniotic sac, a thin-walled sac that surrounds the fetus during pregnancy. The sac is filled with liquid made by the fetus, amniotic fluid, and the membrane that covers the fetus. Covers the fetus side of the placenta amnion. This protects the fetus from injury. It also helps to regulate the temperature of the fetus. Anyway, we're packed up really tightly, and how many? And there's 7 coverings of that tight packed up. Does it say what they are?
Yeah, earth, water, fire, air, ether, space, and then intelligence and false ego. So mind is not included in it because it's more of a connecting element, but the remaining 7 of the 8, subtle and gross elements.
All right, that's the Krishna consciousness understanding. But what is the materialistic understanding?
This is the Vedic understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't use the Veda base. I just used ChatGPT. So this is coming from general Vedic knowledge.
What is the mundane knowledge of it?
Of 7 layers?
All the coverings of the child in the womb. Obviously, a child is covered in the womb for its own protection.
So it's covered by amniotic sac, amniotic fluid, placenta, umbilical cord, uterus, which is the womb of the mother, then decidua, the maternal uterine lining, and then vernix caseosa, a white cheesy substance covering the fetus's skin. Then there is lanugo, a fine layer of downy hair covering the fetus's body, and then the fetal membranes. Apart from the amniotic sac, and other membranes include yolk sac and allantois. So these are some of the layers of different things that cover a baby, a fetus.
You see how terrible the situation is. You have 7 coverings. That's to protect the child, actually. It's to protect the fetus.
Mm-hmm.
But the fetus is in a very difficult, let's say, physical state of being pressed and what you would call in very uncomfortable position. And after the 7th month, the fetus starts kicking and trying to get out of the bad situation that they're in. And the mother feels the baby kicking in her womb, trying to move around and start, just like you do some exercise to move the body parts, so you're not so tight, right? So the baby's doing the same thing, but it's very limited. So it doesn't really solve the problem until it actually is pushed out of the womb. And all this stuff is, you can see how there's suffering right from the beginning of life. Okay, so now we'll just quickly read text number 12. The human soul says, I take shelter of the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who appears in his various eternal forms and walks on the surface of the world. I take shelter of him only because he can give me relief from all fear and from him I have received this condition of life, which is just befitting my impious activities. So here Bhagavatam is revealing that we are actually conscious of our relationship with God in the womb of the mother. But due to the trauma and pain of birth, we forget it. But in the womb of the mother, we are actually conscious of our relationship with God or with Krishna, and we're praying. And you take pictures of the position of the baby in the womb. It's like this: the baby's hands are tight together, and it looks like he's praying, and he is actually praying. Okay, so text number 12, it says, the human soul says, I take shelter of the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who appears in his various eternal forms and walks on the surface of the earth. I take shelter of him only, because he can give me relief from all fears, and from him I have received this condition of life, which is just befitting my impious activities. So here's proof that the living entity in the womb of the mother is actually Krishna conscious and is praying to the Lord, please free me from this horrible situation. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. This is text 12, into 3, chapter 31, text 12. The word Kalak Sharanarvindam refers to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who actually walks or travels upon the surface of the world. For example, Lord Ramachandra actually walked on the surface of the world. And Lord Krishna also walked just like an ordinary man. The prayer is therefore offered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who descends to the surface of this earth or any part of this universe for the protection of the pious and the destruction of the impious. It is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita that when there is an increase of irreligion and discrepancies arise in the real religious activities, the Supreme Lord comes to protect the pious and kill the impious. This verse indicates Lord Krishna. Another significant point in this verse is that the Lord comes ichaya by his own will. As Krishna confirms in Bhagavad Gita, Sambhavami Atmamaya, I appear at my will by my internal potential power. He is not forced to come by the laws of material nature. It is stated here, ichaya. He does not assume any form as the impersonalists think, because he comes at his own will, and the form in which he descends is his eternal form. As the Supreme Lord puts the living entity into the condition of horrible existence, he can also deliver him, and therefore one should seek shelter at the lotus feet of Krishna. Krishna demands, give up everything and surrender unto me. And it is also said in Bhagavad Gita that anyone who approaches him does not come back again to accept a form in material existence, but goes back to Godhead, back home, never to return. Harivilas. That should be our goal in life. This body is actually a illusory pain machine. And just suffer in the body. There's so many things. You get itches and you get cuts and burns. And all kinds of things are happening to the body that cause pain. And that pain is to remind us of the horrible situation we're in with this material material body. And it should make us become really serious about getting out of this body and eventually getting a spiritual body and going back to the spiritual world. It's not a bargain living in the material world. There's only suffering in the material world. Okay, so it says here, as the Supreme Lord puts the living entity into the condition of horrible existence, he can also deliver him, and therefore one should seek shelter at the lotus feet of Krishna. Krishna demands, give up everything and surrender unto me. And it is also said in Bhagavad Gita that anyone who approaches him does not come back again to accept a form in material existence, but goes back to Godhead, back home, never to return. So every day we should be praying to Krishna, please, Krishna. Please, Krishna, free me from this situation of birth, death, old age, and disease. It's too much. I can't stand it anymore. So it says here, as the Supreme Lord puts the living entity into the condition of horrible existence, he can also deliver him. And therefore, one should seek shelter at the lotus feet of Krishna. Krishna demands, give up everything and surrender unto me. And it is also said in Bhagavad Gita that anyone who approaches him, meaning Krishna, does not come back again to accept a form in material existence, but goes back to Godhead, back home, never to return. So we should pray to Krishna. I am surrendered completely to you, Krishna. And I simply want to engage in your devotional service. I'm not hankering for any material benefits. And please free me from all this suffering and illusion that I'm living in. Okay. Krishna demands, give up everything and surrender unto me. And it is also said in Bhagavad Gita that anyone who approaches him does not come back again to accept a form in material existence, but goes back to Godhead, back home, never to return. So that should be our real purpose in life. As the Supreme Lord puts the living entity into the condition of horrible existence, he can also deliver him, and therefore one should seek shelter at the lotus feet of Krishna. Krishna demands, give up everything and surrender unto me. And it is also said in Bhagavad Gita that anyone who approaches him does not come back again to accept a form in material existence, but goes back to Godhead, back home, never to return. So that should be our prayer also. Always to seek shelter at the lotus feet of Krishna. And give up everything and surrender unto Krishna. If you do that, then you go back to Godhead and never come back again to material existence. Well, we were originally with Krishna, but by misuse of our limited free will, we voluntarily wanted to separate ourselves from Krishna. But that's the pitiable, terrible condition that we're in right now. But if we actually give up everything and surrender unto Krishna, then we can come back again. Then we are under the protection of Krishna, and he'll help us in every way to go back to God. But if we forget Krishna and engage in all kinds of different sense gratification and talking nonsense, and especially associating with nonsense people, which is the worst thing you can do, then we forget Krishna and we unnecessarily suffer in this material world. But Krishna demands, give up everything and surrender unto me. He demands it. That means he's adamant. That means he's fixed. And it is also said in Bhagavad Gita, anyone who approaches him does not come back again to accept the form and material existence, but goes back to Godhead, back home, and never returns. That's why Krishna is demanding. It's like, let's say you have a child who's a teenager and he becomes a junkie. In other words, he's taking, smoking marijuana and taking drugs, And the mother and father, they demand that you stop this, right? And they try and sequester their son or daughter so that they don't go out and buy any more drugs or associate anymore with the bad people that have taught them how to take the drugs. But sometimes it's a losing endeavor. And other times it works, where you actually sequester the child and don't let the teenager have any association with those bad people that have taught him how to take drugs and how to be a junkie. Krishna demands, give up everything and surrender to me. And it is said also in Bhagavad Gita that anyone who approaches him does not come back again to accept the form and material existence, but goes back to Godhead, back home, and never to return. That's why Krishna is saying, give up everything and surrender unto me. It's like he's adamant. He's very, let's say, very seriously trying to explain to the living entity, just give up everything and surrender unto me. All right, well, we have to learn to listen to Krishna. And we are, by reading Bhagavatam, listening to what Krishna says. Give up everything and surrender unto me. Harivilas. All right, well, I think we come to the end of our
session
reading this morning. I hope you and I have learned something. Give up everything and surrender unto me. That should be our motto.
Harivilas.
Give up everything to surrender unto Krishna. Harivilas. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Hari Bol.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Krishna Krishna Hare